So a leftist and a liberal centrist walk into a bar. Bartender comes up to them and says, "So what do you have?" The leftist turns and says, "I want a world guided by the principles of justice, where all people are treated fairly and we live in harmony with nature." Bartender pauses and then turns to the liberal centrist and he asks him, "So what kind of world do you want?"
I'll have the same.
In the contemporary discourse, leftist and liberal are often used interchangeably, but there is a pretty significant difference between these two things. Liberals are basically centrists. They're halfway between left and right, by and large. They follow the liberal ideology of free thought and free choice, but without any of the policy to back that up. Whereas leftists, on the other hand, they want a better world. They want a changed and transformed world using revolutionary politics and egalitarian ideals. There is some crossover, and certainly from the perspective of a fundamentally right-wing government, both of them look like they're pulling in the same direction, but the liberals often fall short. To understand the difference between these two ideologies, it might be useful to understand the history of liberalism and how it came to be in the form that it is today. The world before liberalism was not so concerned with the individual. It was the feudal age, in which the divine right of kings and their feudal lords were the be-all and end-all of what is what. There was no democracy, there was no citizen's say in the governance of any given nation or country, with the exception of certain republics that occurred before, such as the Roman Republic in the early days of the Common Era. Although the roots of liberal thought existed well before the modern age, the thoughts of John Locke and other liberal philosophers of the 16th and 17th century really started to solidify the notion of liberalism and consequently of democracy. The key notion here is that the citizenry give consent to being governed in whatever way that they're being governed, which means and implies that they should have a say in what way they're being governed. Another consequence of this being that the individual is free to choose, to govern their life however they would want to pursue whatever opportunities and profession that they may want to or have an inclination to do so. With the establishment of liberal governance practices and the rule of law as a human-constructed ideal rather than a divinely created, unchanging, concrete thing, there was a transition en masse, gradually, towards liberal democracy, away from the divine right of kings. This gave rise to, effectively, the Age of Enlightenment, as it's called in Europe. The blossoming of scientific thought and technological innovation and all the things that we now associate with the modern age are as a result of the advent of liberalism. The notion of governance by the people, as in a republic of representatives, derives from this, where we, the citizens, have the opportunity to be elected to office, to go to Congress or the Senate or a parliament to be able to represent the interests of the common man in order to guide the ruling class. The modern form of constitutional democracy took its form in the United States, where the people came together. We can argue as to how representative those people were of the actual citizenry of the United States, but they came together to draft a constitution which guided the principles of the nation that is blooming into being. The other side of this coin is economic liberalism, wherein not just laws, not just the behavior of individuals, but also economic activity is guided by this principle of freedom and free choice. Thinkers like Adam Smith came along and devised this idea of the free market as the guiding principle of modern capitalist liberalism. The gist of liberalism is that it is a free market, it is a free democracy, the individual has free choice and free reign over their own activities unless impinging upon the freedom of others to choose as they will. This is a limited form of governance, where the ability to exercise power over the individual is limited to the certain things that ensure the liberty of others. Now, I'm glossing over a lot of the details here. The history is rich and full of nuance, which I'm ignoring most of at the moment. What I'm more interested in is the problems of liberalism, where liberalism falls short, and this is where I get my leftist ideals from. On the surface, this notion of liberalism makes a lot of sense. I am free to have free speech. I'm free to have free movement, free association, all the other freedoms that we enjoy as Canadian or American or global citizens. The option to elect one's rulers rather than simply follow the rules of an inherited monarch is a huge boon for individual freedoms, that we don't have to do what the king says. We have some input into our government so that we can choose as citizens what we want the law to be. Similarly, economic liberalism also seems to make a lot of sense, where if the market is free to do whatever it will, and the buying and selling of those that are participating in the market set the demands and the production of the economy, there are some caveats here. There are some consequences that are not exactly built into the system. Around the same time that liberalism became the dominant form of government over Europe and eventually North America, the Industrial Revolution as well as capitalism were rising to dominance as well. With the Industrial Revolution came a huge shift in the way that people lived, the way that they worked, the way that production was taking place, the way that the entire society was organized had to change in order to adapt to meet the industrial mode of production, with factories and centralized productive processes and private ownership of the means of production. Overall, for the average citizen, this sucked. Whereas before, many people were living in their own self-sufficient communities in rural areas, now many people were forced to move into urban areas with really bad air quality, terrible living conditions, and long forced labor hours, effectively. Yes, they were free to quit any job and even not work if they desired to, but without the income that a job provided, it was effectively poverty and starvation as a consequence. And of course, there were some benefits to this. It's not all bad. The increase in technology led to easier kinds of work for a lot of different kinds of production, and people were more free to choose their path in life and not being just slotted into taking over the family business from one's father. But these poor conditions are a consequence of the free market. The factory owners, the people that had the resources to own the means of production and employ the masses, were basically free to make whatever policy decisions they wanted to. They could enforce 12-hour, 13-hour days, shitty working conditions, 6-day, 7-day weeks, effectively whatever they wanted to. Safety standards were not a thing. Effectively, there was no governance against child labor or even indentured servitude. So effectively, a free market, under liberalism, caused a kind of tyranny, not of monarchs, but of industrial magnates. This is where leftist ideology enters the picture. Labor movements brought together the workers of industry to stand up against the owners of the companies, to basically force them into giving better working conditions, better pay, less working hours. And so this is what established the weekend as we know it, and the 8-hour workday, and the minimum wage, and the safety standards that protect people who are workers, as well as preventing child labor. So effectively, by curtailing the liberty of the people that own the means of production, more liberty is then provided to the people that are doing the working. True liberty comes from this balancing act, not giving any one group of people too much power to dominate any other group of people. Total liberty, as in the libertarians of North America, they might believe in a society that's so free that slavery would be allowed if it was so determined by the people that had the power to do so. But of course, this curtails the people's liberty who are being, well, enslaved. So in order to ensure the liberty of all people, certain freedoms do need to be curtailed. Also, law takes this form, where we curtail people's ability to, kill people and steal stuff in order to ensure the freedom and safety and security of everyone else. Through the 20th century, labor movements continued this advancement of human rights and human freedoms by continuing to clamp down on the freedom of the owners of the means of production, as well as governmental efforts to establish welfare programs. The New Deal policies of the early 20th century that gave the end of the Great Depression established a social security net so that all people had a basic minimum through which they wouldn't fall, preventing many, many people from living in squalor and poverty and lifting up the lowliest so that they have a minimum standard of living. This was great for people in the West. This allowed for the Great Society that flourished in the mid-20th century. But then something changed. In the mid-20th century, the elites, the people that had a lot of money, were becoming worried because their personal profits were starting to drop. Yes, the civilization was flourishing quite heavily, and indeed the average worker was living a much better life, but the elites were starting to lose their share of the pie. This anxiety about losing their dominance caused an intellectual revolution within those circles, giving rise to what we now call neoliberal economics. The principle of neoliberalism is a return to the laissez-faire capitalism from before the labor movement. So the systematic undermining of unions, of labor movement gains, the rollback of the continuous advance of labor laws and of minimum wage, effectively trying to undermine all of the things that the New Deal introduced to increase the equality of society. The neoliberal model gained popularity in the mid-70s and late 70s when Ronald Reagan famously championed this style of economic governance, as well as Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom, as well as Trudeau in Canada. Since then, there's been a continuous rightward shift in politics and economic policy. The gains of the left from the earliest 20th century and before were continuously being undermined and rolled back to their laissez-faire days. At the same time, this economic rebellion against regulation started to undermine the decision-making power of government itself. Rather than decisions being made by politicians, which then influenced the market, there was a shift towards decisions being made by the market in order to influence politicians. In the time since, laws that prevented nefarious actors from acting on the economy in a nefarious way have been steadily repealed. The Glass-Steagall Act in the United States was put in place in order to protect the economy from crashing, from investment banks and commercial banks from becoming the same entity. These regulations were in place in order to stop the economy from swaying about wildly. With them removed, the shocks, the booms and busts ended up becoming more intense and more frequent. So this is what we saw in 2008, and I would argue that we're due for another crash much the same. Meanwhile, with each rightward shift of the dominant governing party, the acceptable range of discourse also moved to the right. The leftmost party of most governments ended up slightly more to the right each time, and the left ideology started being less and less acceptable to the common understanding. This is not to say that left ideology makes any less sense than it used to be, but it's been turned into this bad word, this nasty word. In the United States, calling someone a socialist or a communist is tantamount to being like traitor or madman. Clearly, this isn't the case if you actually understand what socialism or communism is, but this is how it's been portrayed as. Now, I'm going to steer clear of talking about the details of those ideologies because that is a topic for another time. Could take hours. But my concern here is that liberalism is now masquerading as the left, whereas liberalism is actually the centrist ideology of our current world. If we look at American politics, and I like to because it's fairly simple and exemplary of what I'm trying to talk about, the Democrat Party seems to be the left party in American politics, and indeed they are on the left of the Republicans. But if you look at the political spectrum from all the way right to all the way left, they're actually significantly right of center. They believe in a totally free market, they are pro-capitalist, they don't believe in the the advancement of nationalization of healthcare or even infrastructure for that matter. And they don't believe in increasing protections for people, the raising the minimum standard of the social safety net. The trouble is, though, that if this is what people think left politics are, they can't even imagine what left politics actually are. It seems unrealistic or insane for anybody to believe anything outside of this narrow realm of discourse. The method of social progress for a liberal is incremental, one step after another, and it's achievable by the ballot box. But the problem is, by the ballot box, certain things just aren't available. We don't have a left option. We don't have the ability to choose someone who will advance labor laws, who will encourage union membership, who will continue to advance the world towards ecological sustainability. It's simply not on offer, but this is the most extreme option that is available. So to me, what the left represents is an expansion of our imagination, to be able to envision a truly better world, a different world, a fundamentally changed world, one that is realistically achievable, yes. However, it cannot be achieved by the means that we've got before us. So how do we achieve this if the means that are available to us simply can't get us there? Well, this is the case for revolutionary politics. I'm not advocating for a violent overthrow in the kind that we've recently seen from the far right. In fact, I would like society to maintain its stability as we make this transition. However, I don't believe that our current electoral democratic system of government is going to be able to do it. There's been this conflation so far of liberalism for the wealthy and corporations with liberalism for the people. These are not the same thing, and in fact, the wealthy and corporations are able to dominate the people, as we saw in the pre-labor movement era of capitalism. So we need to stop this conflation. These are two separate things: economic liberty and social liberty, democratic liberty. It's often been said in pro-capitalist circles that the freer the market, the freer the people, but the market can be a means by which to dominate people. There needs to be regulations, and/or there needs to be a form of economics that allows for free markets that don't allow for the domination of people. What I see as the core of this problem is that the value of a dollar, the value of money, is not tied to anything concrete or useful or valuable. Effectively, it's an arbitrary number that, yes, can be used to facilitate trade and facilitate commerce, but a dollar is only worth an amount of alienated labor time from that you can pay somebody to do an arbitrary amount of labor. If instead a dollar was worth, I don't know, human happiness or ecological sustainability or something worthwhile like that, then perhaps economic forces, if they were a free market, would move towards those goals rather than simply the pure accumulation of capital, which, as we've seen, can mean the domination of human beings and the destruction of the environment. As I say, this is a very oversimplified overview. This is not an issue that we can talk about in a 20-minute or less video on YouTube. This is something that people have studied their entire lives, and I'd like to share more of this as we go forward, but it's going to take some time in order to unpack all of this in snappy sound bites. So if you've enjoyed my content so far, feel free to share it with your friends and indeed hit the like button just down below, as well as subscribing to the channel so you can be notified of what's next. I really enjoy doing this, and I want to be able to make this a profession. So I'll be moving towards trying to do that, and hopefully you can join me. So thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.